The room felt too bright that night. Every polished surface in that lake house catching the light in a way that made me painfully aware of myself. My clothes, my hands, the heaviness in my chest as I sat there pretending not to notice the looks being exchanged around me. Even the silverware felt louder, each clink reminding me just how out of place they wanted me to feel. And if you've ever found yourself shrinking in a room that should have welcomed you, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Someone out there needs to know they're not alone in moments like this. I kept breathing slowly, steadying my hands under the table, holding on to the one thing nobody in that house knew. The morning had changed my life in ways they couldn't imagine, and that was the moment everything started to unravel. I knew the minute I sat down at that long, polished table in Charleston that I shouldn't have been there. The room felt too bright, too pristine, too delicate for someone like me who had just lost her job 2 weeks earlier. I tried to steady my breathing, but every glance from Savannah's parents felt like a quiet reminder that I no longer belonged in their world. They didn't have to say a word. The way their eyes softened with pity and tightened with judgment told me everything. I could feel my cheeks warming as they asked about my free time now, as if unemployment were some kind of leisurely vacation. I kept my smile small and polite, even as something inside me sank. My chair felt lower than everyone else's. My clothes too plain, my voice too quiet. I watched the silverware glint under the chandelier and wondered how a single table setting could cost more than the rent I was struggling to plan for. Their conversations flowed around me. Vacation homes, investments, fundraisers, and I sat there, shrinking, fighting to keep my dignity intact. But even in that moment, with their subtle jabs settling into my chest, I felt something steady beneath the embarrassment, a quiet reminder of the call I'd received earlier that morning. None of them knew. Not Savannah, not Michael, not the people smirking into their wine glasses. I held that secret close, letting it anchor me as I nodded along. They thought they knew exactly who I was. They had no idea what was coming next. I spent most of my adult life working at a small logistics company on the outskirts of Charleston. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it gave me a sense of purpose. I liked knowing people counted on me. I liked being the one who kept everything organized when the days got chaotic. For more than 20 years, that place felt like a second home. Losing it so suddenly left a hollow space inside me that I'm still trying to understand. One morning, I was part of a team, and by that afternoon, I was carrying a cardboard box out to my car, wondering how I was going to start over at my age. Through all those years, my son Michael was the reason I pushed myself. I raised him on my own, doing the best I could with what I had. When he married Savannah, I was genuinely happy for him. She was kind to me in those early days, sweet in the ways young people are when they still believe family can blend without friction. But once I met her parents, the Caldwells, I began to feel something shift. Their world was bigger, shinier, and much harder to breathe in. Money doesn't always make people unkind, but in their case, it created a quiet line that I could feel every time I stepped into their home. Michael didn't mean to drift away from me, but he did. Little comments from Savannah's family, gentle reminders of where I fit, slowly carved out a distance I didn't know how to close. Sitting at their dinner table that night only pressed on wounds I'd been trying to ignore. And even as I sat there, feeling smaller than I had in years, I kept thinking about the phone call I'd gotten earlier that morning. News I hadn't shared with anyone yet, not even Michael. I keep going back to that morning, long before the dinner, long before the looks that cut into me. I was pouring myself a small cup of coffee when my phone rang. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another bill reminder. But something in me answered anyway. The man on the other end spoke gently, and the moment I heard my great-uncle Henry's name, my stomach tightened. I hadn't seen him in years, yet he had always been kind to me in the quiet, steady way some people are. Hearing he had passed hit me harder than I expected. Grief came first, sharp and sudden, like a door closing that I never realized was still open. Then the attorney told me why he was calling. My great uncle had left everything to me. I remember gripping the counter, trying to understand what everything meant. When he said the estate was valued at $46 million, I felt the world tilt. I thought he had made a mistake. I thought maybe I had misheard him. But he kept explaining, patient and detailed, while I tried to breathe through the swirl of disbelief and sorrow. I didn't feel powerful. I felt quiet, almost fragile, like the truth might shatter if I touched it too quickly. But beneath the shock, something steady began to form, a sense that my life had shifted in a way I couldn't name yet. I spent the rest of the day holding the news close, almost afraid to move. And when I walked into that dinner, listening to those little jabs and judgments, part of me wanted to laugh at the contrast. They saw someone small and defeated. They had no idea I had woken up in one world and stepped into another, without ever looking back. I walked back into that dining room with the same tight smile I had been holding since I arrived. Savannah's parents' lake house was beautiful in the way money always is. Everything polished, oversized, and arranged to remind you that you don't quite belong. Even the air felt curated, carrying the faint scent of something expensive I couldn't name. I sat at the far end of the table, where people place the guest they don't plan to engage with. Every comment around me felt like a soft tap on a bruise. Little observations about careers, success, and ambition, all drifting past me like I wasn't supposed to catch the meaning. I heard the gentle amusement in their voices when my name came up, as if my whole life were something mildly unfortunate. I kept nodding, pretending the words didn't sting, pretending I didn't see the glance Savannah gave Michael when I mentioned looking for work. It was the kind of look that said she wished I had kept quiet. I felt myself shrinking in that chair, feeling older, out of step, out of place. But underneath the humiliation, I carried the weight of the morning. The knowledge of that inheritance sat with me like a hidden light, something warm pressed against my ribs. I didn't cling to it out of pride. I clung to it because it reminded me I wasn't as small as they wanted me to feel. By the time dessert was served, something in me had shifted. The dinner didn't just hurt, it opened my eyes. Their judgment wasn't about me losing my job. It was part of something much deeper, something I needed to understand before I decided what to do next. After that dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I experienced at that table was only the surface of something deeper. I kept replaying little comments I had heard over the years, things Savannah's father, Richard, had said in passing about acquisitions, restructuring, and unlocking value. Back then, I never paid much attention. I thought it was just the kind of language wealthy people used to describe business deals I didn't understand. But after losing my job, those words started to take on a different shape. I began connecting pieces I hadn't realized were related. The company I worked for had been struggling for months before the layoffs. Rumors had circulated about outside investors pushing for efficiency. And I remembered one afternoon at Michael and Savannah's house when Richard mentioned a deal he was closing that involved cutting non-essential staff. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now, the memory made my stomach turn. As I sat alone the night after the dinner, I searched my mind for every detail I had ignored. It became clearer that men like Richard built their success on the backs of workers like me. Jobs lost, benefits stripped, whole departments erased. All so companies like his could squeeze out a little more profit. My job loss wasn't just bad luck. It was the collateral damage of people who never had to feel the consequences of their decisions. The more I realized this, the more something solid formed inside me. It wasn't anger exactly, it was clarity. A sense that if I didn't speak up, if I didn't push back, I would be accepting a kind of quiet cruelty I couldn't live with. That was the moment the decision started to form. When I finally got home after that dinner, I didn't turn on any lights. I just let the darkness settle around me as I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing the clothes I had eaten in. I felt drained in a way that went deeper than exhaustion. It was the weight of everything I had learned, Everything I had endured, pressing down all at once. The humiliation from that table still clung to me, as if their judgment had followed me through the door. But underneath that sting was something sharper, something clearer. I kept replaying the pieces I had put together about Richard's company, the way his decisions rippled outward and landed on people like me without a second thought. I thought about the layoffs, the broken promises, the families scrambling to rebuild. And then I thought about the inheritance I had received that morning, sitting quietly inside me like a held breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of choice, not revenge, not payback, something deeper. A chance to push back against a system that pretended people like me were invisible. As I sat there, I realized I didn't want to spend another day shrinking myself to fit into rooms that were never meant for me. I wanted to do something that mattered. I reached for my phone, feeling a steadiness I hadn't felt in years, and began looking up legal and financial advisors. That was the moment everything truly began. I never imagined that my first real step after that night would be opening my door to a team of professionals who spoke a financial language I had never even heard before. Yet there I was, sitting at my small dining table with legal pads spread out in front of me, listening carefully as they walked me through what my inheritance made possible. It felt surreal at first, almost like I was watching someone else's life unfold. But the more I learned, the clearer everything became. Caldwell and Price Investments wasn't the impenetrable fortress it pretended to be. Under the polished exterior were cracks, exposed debt, overextended projects, and partnerships held together by ego rather than stability. The advisors explained how companies like Richard's often relied on layers of borrowed money, stacking risk on top of risk until one strategic move could shift the entire balance. I realized that with the resources I now had, I could buy into their debt quietly, piece by piece, until the leverage was in my hands instead of theirs. It wasn't about destroying anything. It was about taking control of a system that had never cared about the damage it caused. Each meeting, each document I signed, brought a strange mix of nerves and calm determination. It felt like stepping into a world I had never been invited to enter, but one I had every right to stand in now. I wasn't moving out of anger. I was moving with purpose, steady and careful. And as the final pieces began to fall into place, I felt the momentum building. I knew that the next step would take me directly into the path of the Caldwell family. And nothing about that path would be simple. But I was ready. I had never been more certain of anything in my life. When the first waves of my actions reached the Caldwells, I felt the shift long before anyone said a word. Michael grew quieter around me, carrying a stiffness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He didn't look angry, just confused, like he was trying to make sense of something he couldn't quite name. Savannah, on the other hand, moved differently. She carried tension like a shadow, always a step behind her. I could feel her watching me, not with hostility, but with a kind of wary caution, as if she knew the ground beneath her family was starting to tremble. I tried to keep my distance, letting them process whatever they were hearing behind closed doors. But even from afar, I could see the strain creeping into the edges of their lives. It was painful, knowing my choices were touching them in ways I never intended. There were moments when guilt sat heavy on my chest, pressing against the certainty I had fought so hard to find. I kept questioning whether justice always came with this much collateral heartache. Yet every time doubt tried to take root, I reminded myself why I started. I remembered the layoffs, the disregard, the quiet suffering of people who had no safety net. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because someone had to draw a line. Still, there was something in the way Savannah looked at me. A flicker of hesitation, almost fear. It felt like she was holding a truth she hadn't found the courage to share yet. I could sense it coming, like the air before a storm. I knew something was coming long before Savannah finally approached me. There had been a tension around her that didn't feel like the usual discomfort she carried when her family was involved. It was deeper, almost fragile, like she was walking around with a secret that grew heavier every day. I noticed it in the way she lingered near me without speaking, the way her eyes followed mine and then quickly darted away. It felt like she was waiting for the right moment to exhale. When she finally did, it didn't happen in a dramatic burst. It was quiet, almost hesitant. I remember the way she stood there, shoulders drawn in, as if bracing herself for something she knew might break. She didn't need to say the words. I could see the truth in the way she handed me that envelope, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the calm she tried to hold. Inside were documents, financial trails, internal memos, pieces of a much larger pattern she had been collecting for months. She had known what her family was doing, and she had been watching it destroy people, just like it had destroyed parts of me. What struck me most wasn't the information itself. It was the grief in her eyes, the quiet plea for someone to understand that she wasn't her family, that she had been trying to do the right thing in the only way she knew how. In that moment, everything shifted. Savannah wasn't an adversary. She was another casualty of their world, reaching for a lifeline. And her truth pushed me toward the confrontation I knew was coming. Whether I was ready or not, I walked into their home with a steadiness I had never felt before. It wasn't confidence exactly. It was clarity, a calm understanding of what had to be done and why. The air in the room felt tight the moment Richard and Eleanor saw me. There was a flicker of confusion first, then irritation, and finally something sharper when they realized I wasn't there to shrink her, apologize. I could feel the weight of every moment that had brought me to this point. The layoffs, the dinner, the judgment, the quiet cruelty passed off as sophistication. I set the documents down between us, not with force, but with purpose. Watching their eyes scan the pages was like watching a slow unraveling. Shock spread across Richard's face first. The kind that comes when a man who has always held the upper hand suddenly realizes he has miscalculated. Eleanor tried to steady herself, but I saw the blanching in her cheeks, the way her composure fractured at the edges. Savannah's evidence hit them harder than I expected. Internal memos, financial trails, decisions they had buried under layers of influence. She had handed me the truth they never thought would surface, and as they processed it, I felt no triumph. Just a deep, settled sense of rightness. I spoke only in my mind, reminding myself why I was there, not to humiliate them, but to hold them accountable in a way the world around them never had. Their operations were exposed, their leverage gone, their certainty crumbling. When I finally turned to leave, I didn't feel lighter. I felt grounded. A quiet shift had taken place, one that couldn't be reversed. Everything had changed, and for the first time in a long time, the change felt just. In the days after the confrontation, everything felt strangely still, as if the world had taken a long breath and finally let it out. I carried no sense of victory, only a quiet understanding that the storm had passed and something steadier was beginning to grow in its place. Michael came to me first, not with explanations, but with a softness I hadn't seen in him for years. I could feel his confusion easing as he began to understand why I had acted the way I did. Our conversations were gentler now, more honest, as if we were meeting each other again after a long separation. Savannah, too, surprised me. The distance that once lingered between us started to dissolve. I saw her not as an extension of her family, but as a woman trying to make things right in the only ways she could. There was a quiet respect forming between us, built on truth rather than politeness. With the influence I now held, I focused on helping the people affected by Caldwell and Price. The workers displaced, the families left scrambling. Each step felt like stitching something back together inside myself. And as I watched life settle into a steadier rhythm, I knew I was finally ready to look back and understand the journey that had brought me here. When I look back on everything that happened, what stays with me most isn't the confrontation or the shifts in power. It's the quiet moments, The ones where I finally learned to listen to myself, to trust that my worth was never defined by someone else's judgment. This journey taught me that dignity isn't something people can give or take away. It's something we reclaim when we decide we deserve better. I'm grateful for the people who stood with me, even in unexpected ways, and for the strength I found when I felt the most alone. If my story means anything, I hope it encourages someone out there to hold their ground, to speak up when something feels wrong, and to believe that change is possible, no matter how small they feel. Have you ever faced a moment that forced you to find your voice? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story.